The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
I got to do the U-turn around the thing? Okay. So, Kelby, do I want the north entry or the south, or does it matter? Okay. Are we doing curbside bag check? Which way, Kelby? Left?
Yeah. Okay.
Kelby, can I go through the T? Yeah, I have a toll tag.
Yeah, you go through the T.
Okay. What do you do that, like, you could just spend 2 hours doing and have it suck all your time?
Oh, I like to look up interesting research articles on animal behavior. Found a really interesting European papers on how wolves are different than dogs that I read last week that were very, very interesting.
Very cool.
Because I've always talked about a brain can be more social emotional or a brain can be more cognitive.
Yeah.
And the wolf turns out to be more cognitive, and we've bred the dog to be more social emotional.
How fascinating is that?
Very, very interesting. The wolves are very good at watching another wolf solve a problem.
We were talking a little bit about television before, and I cannot believe that what you said to me, what you like to watch on television.
Star Trek. I was a Star Trek fan when I was a teenager. I liked the Star Trek Next Generation. I was watching that when I was working on my PhD in the 80s.
And so
Total Star Trek fan.
What's your favorite series, and what's your favorite character, and what's your favorite
Mr.
episode?
Spock was my favorite character.
Love it. And what's favorite episode? This guy is
let
going
me
to hate
see.
me.
There was a lot of good. My favorite Star Trek movie was the one with the whales.
Yes.
Yep, I really
mine
liked
too.
that Star Trek movie.
And so sad that we lost Leonard Nimoy this year.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that you like to watch television. Do you like to go to the movies too?
Oh yes, I went and saw Gravity. There's certain movies that have to be seen in a theater, like Gravity and Avatar.
Yes.
I wanted to see Inside Out in the theater. I really liked that movie.
What did you think of that?
I liked it. I think about how the emotions interact.
I gotta be honest, I had said after that I thought that it was going to be a great tool for people to show kids on the autism spectrum about perspective taking.
Yeah.
About what it's like in other people's heads.
Well, no, it's more like how the emotions inside your own head sort of conflict with each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love The Wizard of Oz, and I love the idea of the ruby slippers. She had the way back home. She just didn't know she had it.
Yeah.
You see, and I think that's a metaphor for a lot of things. A lot of people have the ruby slippers, but they don't know they have them. They don't know they have the key that can open up the door to a lot of really great stuff.
So what would you say was your ruby slipper?
Well, I had, when some opportunities came up, like when I designed those dip vats, that was a major breakthrough for my business. And when the head of the feed yard came up to me and asked me if I'd do it, I said, give me 3 weeks. You know, a lot of people would have been too scared to walk through the door. Now, this is pre-internet, and I knew it would take me 3 weeks to get some of the information I needed, especially on concrete reinforcement, to design the dip vats.
But you did it.
I did it. I was on the phone the next day to the USDA to get the drawings on the concrete reinforcement.
Wow. So I want to journey back to childhood for just a second and talk about friends, because a lot of times people ask about friends. Who was your best friend?
When I was in elementary school, one of my best friends was a girl named Eleanor. And she was the first girl in elementary school to get to take wood shop instead of cooking. And I was the second girl in our school to get to take wood shop. So we like to make stuff. It's all about making stuff. And I had good friends in high school. Even though I got bullied and teased, I got friends who shared interests. Riding horses together, doing electronics together, doing model rockets together, doing stuff together with other students.
So you found, like your mom says about, you found your tribe.
Yeah, and you've got to get them in doing things with other people.
And you did a lot of theater, and did you sing as a kid?
Yeah, I did. One of the problems I was singing is I couldn't synchronize my rhythm with somebody else's rhythm.
Do you still have a hard time doing that?
I still have a hard time doing that.
Because we were going to ask you if you wanted to sing something in the car with us.
Well, I think maybe we'll skip that.
Great question. But the one question people always ask us is they want to know if you've ever been in love.
No, never have.
And you don't feel like you're missing anything.
I've seen so much turmoil in so many marriages that I haven't really seen a situation that would be a good model.
And yet you gave me really good marriage advice.
Because I'm a good problem solver. You have to take the problem and cut it down. And in engineering, you have to find the root cause of a problem.
What do you think is your secret to your success as a teacher?
Well, presenting things really clearly.
Yeah.
That's really important. Making things interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's also important that it's something in a class that a student can take home and use. I teach a class in cattle behavior and handling, and I've got a lot of students that are pre-vet that are going to go in the dog and cat. Probably won't be handling any cattle. But I said, you want to design this corral system because it's visual problem solving. You have to figure out how to do it. It's not a cookbook. And then I have my internet project where they can pick out anything in animal behavior, and I make them dig into a narrow subject that I have to approve because I want them digging into Google Scholar and PubMed, Science Direct, and the other databases. They got to learn how to find stuff online, and I'm finding about 2/3 of the students are not very good at that. How about this? Make magazine. This is the kind of thing that a lot of kids on the spectrum need to be doing. The cool stuff in here. Really
Make Magazine is going to love that you
Make
did that.
Magazine. It's a wonderful magazine. And I'm okay. Yes, and they're resurrecting old satellites from mission control and an abandoned McDonald's. That's the kind of stuff I really like. These are the kind of magazines we need to get in school. Make Magazine, Business Week, Science, Nature, Wired. We got to show kids out there. There's all kinds of super interesting stuff out there. But if they don't see it, then they don't know about it. I like to geek out on construction sites. Yeah. I like to salivate over all the equipment they've got that we didn't have, like really cool man lifts and nice scaffolding. We didn't have any of that stuff.
You didn't?
No, we didn't.
What did you guys have?
Horrid,
a compass?
Horrid ladders that were really dangerous is what we had.
I'm going to pull up right here. We're going to get your stuff out. Yep. Put your back up. Oh. We have to get the mic back from you too. Oh, you took it off already. You're good. That's attached to mine.
Welcome to Autism Live. We have a very special guest on the phone this morning, as promised. We have Temple Grandin on the phone with us. First of all, Temple, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. I understand that you had a great deal of snow this morning.
Oh, we had a horrible amount of snow last night. I gave a talk over in Greeley at the educational college, and the roads were just horrible coming back home.
Wow. It's not supposed to happen at this time of the month in April, is it? In the beginning of April, maybe, but craziness. Well, Temple, we have so many questions for you. It's kind of overwhelming. We put out a call to parents asking if there was anything that they wanted to ask you and individuals who are on the spectrum. And we have so many questions. There's no way that we're going to get through all of them, but I want to get to as many as possible. So if it's okay with you.
Why don't you try to pick out the questions where people may have had the same question,
Yes.
several different people.
And I've tried to do that in a couple of different things. Starting with the first question is, what was the most difficult thing that you've had to overcome during your teenage years, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, teasing and bullying was absolutely the worst. And the only place where I was not teased and bullied was when I was horseback riding or doing Model Rocket Club or doing electronics lab. Those specialized interests were refuges away from teasing. Now, one of the problems we have today is today, if I had been out riding, they would have been texting me all kinds of horrible stuff like tape recorder and workhorse. Those were some of the names that they called me. Teasing was the worst possible thing. I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting these kids involved with shared interests, like electronics, school play, band, because those can be refuges from teasing.
Okay, absolutely wonderful question. This is a great question that came in from a viewer. What do autistic people pay attention to when they are communicating with other people?
Well, when I was young, I didn't even know about all the little subtle eye signals. I didn't even know they existed until I read about them in a book when I was 50 years old. And, that's sort of like not knowing the language. Now, today, there's so many educational materials that can teach people those things.
Absolutely. But for younger kids, when you were younger and you didn't know about those things, what kinds of things did you pay attention to?
Well, I knew if somebody was laughing out loud or if somebody was mad. I certainly understood that. It was the subtle things that I did not understand.
Yeah. Interesting. Was there something, though, were you somebody who looked at people's faces, or did you just listen to the tone of their voice before you knew about those subtle things?
Well, the only subtle sign that I picked up was tone of voice. Okay. And when I was getting my business started, I would sometimes call up clients, and if they had a little whine in their voice, then I knew that maybe they weren't happy with me. And that's a subtle signal that animals pick up. If you went up to your dog and you went, "You're a horrible dog," and you said it like that, he'd wag his tail. Yes. Because he's going to be cueing into the tone of voice.
Right. Very fascinating. Okay, so tone of voice then is probably really important, especially when you're working with younger kids.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. All right, a little bit more specific question here. My 5-year-old is high-functioning autistic. When he gets agitated, for example, his sister takes his toy, he thumps himself in his head and his face. What can I do to make him use his words? And they wrote, P.S. Your life story was an awakening for me. I understood my boy so much more, so thank you.
Well, that's really good. I'm glad that they understood him better. One of the things we've got to do is teach kids about turn taking, because I was reading some research where some of the executive function problems can be improved with the kid has to learn how to inhibit a response. And I was taught turn taking with the Parcheesi board. Also, I had to learn that you've got to give those dice a fair shake. And I was always encouraged to speak. But I think working on activities where he has to inhibit a response will help on this.
Absolutely. I think
board games are absolutely great.
I'm a fan of board games, too. We taught my son so many different life skills using board games, and it was very reinforcing.
They really helped me.
Well, and Parcheesi was your favorite one?
Well, you see, right after the war, when I was 2.5 years old, the children's board games just did not exist.
Oh.
And so the checkers was too hard, and so my mother got the 2 easiest grown-up games, and they were Parcheesi and Chinese checkers that you play with the marbles.
Right.
And the Parcheesi board was the main board game that was used with me when I was very, very young.
Wow. Do you still play board games, Temple?
No, I don't now, but I really recommend them for little kids. The other thing is, back in the 50s, things that were really fun you had to do with other kids. Because when I was a little older, I got a table hockey set, and that was my favorite thing. But you have to play that with somebody else.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because a lot of games now, kids get to isolate with computer games and things and be by themselves. Even if they're chatting with somebody else, they're very isolated while they're doing it.
Well, I think we've got to be doing more activities involving turn-taking and playing with other kids in the real world. Now, something like a Wii. Okay, if you do tennis doubles on the Wii,
yes,
that is doing something. So I'm not anti-technology.
Right.
But let's do things where the kids have to interact in real life. It could be with an electronic game. You can get electronic Scrabble now. You can play that, with 2 kids playing it on a phone.
Yes.
But I want the kids interacting in the real world together. They have got to learn those social skills.
Absolutely.
And if you can use an electronic device, fine. But I want them taking turns with that thing that's on the phone.
Okay, great. Interesting that you brought up technology, because our next question was about getting equipment and technology and finding funding for it. And they wanted to know if you're aware of any grants or insurance that would help to cover that. We're looking for an iPad, since it has apps that can help with speech issues and task management.
Well, one of the things now is old iPads can probably be bought very, very cheaply on eBay. The iPad 1 is going to work just fine. Now, I know the Pro Go is kind of pricey, but I think if you look around, you can find other apps that are free.
Yes.
Also, for older kids and high-functioning kids, there's fabulous free college courses online.
Yes.
Things like Coursera, edX, and Udacity, and Khan Academy.
Absolutely. You gave me some great advice about that for my son. We actually wrote a blog about it on our site, listing all those things that you had told me for my son. If people are interested, they can go to our blog to find that.
How many hits did you get on that stuff?
You know what? That's a really good question, and I'll have to look that up for you because I don't know off the top of my head. But I will find that out and let you know, Temple, because it was really good information. Yes, because it's
okay. Let's do some more questions.
Yes, absolutely. We had a lot of questions about sensory issues. One in particular, my 9-year-old has a lot of sensory issues that cause her to flap her hands and jump up and down when she's excited. Is there a way we can help her to control these overstimulations?
Well, I think working with an OT, there's a number of different sensory activities that can help reduce this, things like deep pressure, slow swinging. Another thing that helps is just heavy work. I think one of the reasons why I liked cleaning the horse stalls so much when I was 15 is that the heavy work helped to calm down my nerves.
Interesting.
And lots of exercise also helps. Other things, fish oil supplements. I've been taking some B6 and magnesium that I just buy over at Whole Foods, and that's been helpful for me. I get the Blue Bonnet B100s. Let's get 10 tons of sugar out of the diet.
Yeah.
And I found myself, I've got to have some animal protein in the morning. Otherwise, I just cannot function.
Interesting.
But work with a good OT that's trained in sensory activities. Also, what was done with me, I was allowed to have an hour after lunch where I could just veg out and spin things. But then there were other places where it was not allowed, like the dinner table or in the classroom. But some of these kids need to have sensory breaks where they can do a calming activity. And one of the reasons some kids do these behaviors is that they are calming.
Yeah.
But the problem, you let the kid do it all day, his mind's not going to develop.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's super duper advice. You had talked the last time we talked with you about limiting the amount of time that they could stim, and we've had several parents write in and said they've said how effective that has been working with their kids.
Good.
Very good, good advice.
We limit it. We don't eliminate it. We limit it.
Absolutely. Super advice. Somebody wants to know, what are your thoughts on yellow street signs similar to those for deaf or blind people for neighborhoods with autistic children? I'm battling with my city trying to get one. They say they're only available for people with physical disabilities or sensory issues. I say to them that autism can be both, but they won't listen.
What kind of signs they're trying to get? I don't understand.
They want to put up like a yellow sign like you would put up for a deaf child or for a blind child, notifying people in the neighborhood that they need to use caution and slow down. And she wants to know what you think about that to label. We had one in our neighborhood that said deaf child area so that people were just a little bit more aware. She's wanting to put up one that says autistic child, and she wants to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, you could just get your own sign and put it up.
That's true. That's true. But do you think there's anything negative in terms of doing that and notifying people in the neighborhood?
One of the problems is I think drivers might get confused because they're going to know what a deaf child is.
Yeah.
But, you're not sure what an autistic child's going to do. See, sometimes they get so much in their own world that they act like they're deaf.
Yeah.
They're not aware of what's going on around them.
And so maybe if the concern is that the child elopes, maybe they need to put up a deaf child sign. I think what she's concerned about is safety.
Just put up a sign, something. I know that a lot of people don't like the word handicapped, but I'm looking at drivers.
Yes.
Going down a street.
For them to understand.
I think they're going to react better to a sign that said handicapped child caution than autistic child, because they're not going to know how to react to that. Because you don't know who's driving down that street.
Great. And speaking of driving, our next question is about driving. What challenges did you face when you first learned to drive? My son is 16, has Asperger's, and doesn't want to drive, but will if pushed to. He's a very good driver with a few exceptions that make me too nervous to let him go out on the road alone. Just wondering how you felt and how you handled this experience.
Well, I spent a year on easy roads before I did any freeways or did any traffic.
Okay.
You've got to get the driving, in other words, braking, steering, and gas, so practiced that it becomes like autopilot,
Yeah.
where you don't have to think about that. And then ease into, more difficult traffic. And that deals with the multitasking problem. He needs to just get hours and hours and hours behind the wheel, parking, driving in totally safe places, like a big supermarket parking lot,
Yeah.
the little road in a suburban cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
Practice, practice, practice. Because what was done with me was out on my aunt's ranch. The mailbox was 3 miles away, and 6 days a week, I drove the car up to the mailbox on a dirt road. Actually, it was a pickup truck with 3 on the column with a really awful balky clutch. So that was 6 miles of driving I did a day with my aunt sitting right beside me
Nice.
for an entire summer. And that's a lot of practice. He's
Yeah.
got to just get in the hours of practice.
Okay.
And then you go on an easy suburban street where you got to do a few lights, there's just a few other cars, and you gradually work into more difficult situations.
Okay. Were you excited to get behind the wheel, though, or were you a little bit reluctant in the beginning?
I was reluctant. My aunt just
Okay.
said to me, "We're going to start to learn how to drive."
Okay.
And the very first day, she didn't make me deal with the clutch. And so I sat beside her, and I steered the truck.
Okay.
And as soon as I got used to steering, then she got me in the truck, and I had to deal with the clutch, and the truck lurched forward. But we were in a dirt driveway where there was nothing to hit.
Okay.
And I had to learn how to work that clutch. But I was doing this all out on dirt roads where there was just hardly any other cars around.
Right. Right. Fascinating. Okay. Good. Good to know. Next question is about a 10-year-old who protests for every single task, wants to really do nothing. What strategy do you suggest, Temple?
Well, you say wants to do nothing.
Yeah.
Just, what are some of the tasks he's being asked to do?
Well, and she doesn't go into any further detail on that, but we do have a couple of other questions that have to do with this too, of children who just really want to sit and veg, that they're, being asked to get dressed, asked to go to school, asked to go outside and play, asked to engage in activity, and it's not even that they're wanting to play video games, they just want to veg. And
well, some of this is really, really high anxiety.
Okay.
Because I can remember one time getting into big panic attacks and wanting to just stay in my room and not do anything. My mother would just come and get me out.
Okay.
There was one thing, they weren't going to let me be a recluse in my room.
Yeah.
Just wasn't going to be allowed. And when I was at the boarding school and I was not doing very much studying, I was doing a lot of horse stall cleaning. But the place where they drew a line in the sand is I was not allowed to just stay in my room. I had to show up at meals. I had to show up at chapel. I had to go to movie night. And I didn't want to do movie night because I was nervous, so they made me projectionist.
Oh, great idea. That's wonderful. And so, Temple, were there consequences if you didn't do it, or were there incentives for doing it?
Well, if I had just was going to totally stay in my room and not get dressed for church, there would have been consequences.
Okay.
And probably rather severe ones.
And what did they offer you the incentive that you could do the spinning with the plate on your bed if you did do it?
No, they didn't do anything like that.
Okay.
I don't think you got to remember. I just never got to that point because there were expectations
Okay.
that I had to come down to meals.
Yes.
And I can remember twice in my life getting spanked, and there was always that threat.
Okay.
And I also would get television taken away from me.
Okay.
And I wanted to watch the Howdy Doody show. And if I threw tantrums and things like that, there'd be no Howdy Doody show for one night.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty big consequence. All right. Somebody wants to know, what did you need from school that you did not get?
Well, actually, I had a good elementary school education. Where I got into problems at school was in high school. I just wasn't interested in teenage girls. They're no longer interested in doing projects, and I still wanted to do projects. High school, in a large girls' school, was disaster. I got thrown out for fighting because kids teased me. I know some of the worst parts of my life. We need to develop the areas of strength. Like my ability in art was always encouraged, and that became the basis of my career.
Well, that's a wonderful thing. Lovely compliments that people sent you. Somebody said, Temple, hello, you are an inspiration, intelligent, and caring woman. Thank you for your contributions to the world of autism. I have to ask you about the movie part with your mother. You and your mother are on the stairs. She has flashcards. She is slowly pronouncing C-A-T, cat. Cat.
Og. Og. Temple. Dog. Temple. Cat. Cat. Temple trough. Ma. Me.
Exactly what my speech teacher did.
Okay.
She slowed down and she enunciated the words. And I can remember her holding up a cup. She tended to use objects more than flashcards. And she'd hold up a cup and she'd say, now say cup, cup, pa. And she'd slow down and enunciate the hard consonant sounds so I could hear them.
Yeah.
Because when the grown-ups talked really fast, it sounded like gibberish. In fact, I thought grown-ups had their own special language.
Interesting. We've heard many autistic adults saying that when the words came in, they sounded like something completely different, and they seemed to go fast. So that's very interesting. And she wanted to know if you think that type of work with a toddler is important if they're on the autism spectrum.
You mean would work with flashcards or work the child?
Going that slow, one-on-one, and going that slow, that skill building.
I think autistic toddlers need lots and lots of one-on-one, and that's supported by all the research on applied behavior analysis, or ABA. These kids need 20 or 30 hours a week of one-on-one teaching with an effective teacher that just kind of knows how hard to push the child. You know, you push them too hard, they have a meltdown. You don't push them enough, they don't advance. But some kids you have to slow down a whole lot, maybe others you do not. You know, that's going to be very, very variable.
Okay.
My speech teacher would say, now say cup, and then she'd go, cup, pa. Okay, say cup. Okay, now cup, pa. She'd go back and forth between saying it regular and saying it very, very slowly.
Okay, good advice. All right, so we had a lot of questions about difficulties with getting kids to do homework, and I picked one in particular. She writes, my autistic daughter is 9 years old and has meltdowns when it comes to doing homework, especially when it comes to putting pencil to paper, knowing she knows it in her head. At times she can rattle off the answers orally, and other times when it's the easiest of answers like 2 + 2 = 4, she says it's too hard. She cannot focus on the task. I give her little breaks and don't pressure her, but a sheet of homework can last for hours, and a lot of screaming, stomping, crying, biting, punching, throwing things, etc. in between. How do I make this a much simpler task for both of us? She's been getting ABA therapy from school, but they're not seeing a difference with what's happening at school.
Well, first of all, I've got to try to figure out what's going on here, whether there's some kind of sensory problem with the writing instrument. See, this is the kind of thing where I've got to get a lot more information about why she's throwing these fits. I've got to make sure that maybe she has a problem with fluorescent lights, you know, in the place where she has to do the homework. Because this is sounding, it's so severe, it's sounding like a sensory issue. My problem with doing homework is I just was not interested. It was not a sensory reason. And I only knuckled down and started studying in high school when I had the goal of becoming a scientist. See, that's a different thing. And maybe a child that's got some kind of sensory issue doesn't like touching the paper or something. You know, maybe she should do her homework on a computer. You know, I don't know. I'd have to ask a lot more questions. So,
but the potential to change the variables up, because it also strikes me that she mentions that she can, a lot of the times she can do the question in her head, but when it comes to the easiest of answers, that she says it's too hard. And I know it's, you just were mentioning that sometimes it wasn't interesting to you. It was boring.
Well, that's one thing, but the other thing is you can have a kid that's echolele. In other words, they yak out all these TV commercials, but they don't know what they mean.
Yeah.
You see, what might be happening, and I'm just saying, I want to emphasize, might be happening.
Right.
Is that you know, the circuit in the brain for doing this with auditory is working, but maybe her vision, maybe she's got visual processing problems. And she's seeing kind of broken up stuff, and she doesn't see the paper right. And in my book, The Way I See It, I've got 2 chapters in there where I address visual processing problems.
Yeah.
Maybe the print's jiggling on the page, you know, and so in other words, she might be an auditory learner, and maybe that's the way we need to approach things.
Okay, interesting. So lots of different variables. And you mentioned your book. You've got a new book that's coming out. Do you want to tell us really quickly what the new book is?
Well, the new book is going to be called The Autistic Brain. It's going to be released on April 30th. And I worked with a really great co-author, Richard Panik, a super science writer. The first chapter reviews the history of the diagnostic criteria.
Lovely.
And I have to say it was rather shocking seeing the whole history just laid out side by side, see how much they changed the diagnosis. Then the next chapter, we go into genetics research, and it's complicated genetics research. We have a whole chapter in sensory in there. I think a lot of people are going to find helpful. I have a chapter on the different kinds of minds, visual thinking mind, the mathematics mind, word minds, and then a chapter on all my brain scans that have been done on me, and there's pictures of all the brain scans, and then a final chapter on jobs for the different kinds of minds and getting people prepared for careers.
Lovely. Well, I can't wait to read this. And we actually have a bunch of questions about jobs that I'm going to get to before we get done. Really interesting question that caught my attention, wondering what you think about it. Somebody wrote in and said, my daughter talks to her hands as if they were puppets. She refers to her left hand as the bad hand and her right hand as the good hand. She sometimes puts things in between her fingers of her left hand as if they were eating something or putting things on top of it as a hat. She has different voices for each of them. She calls the left hand Jessie, named for a classmate of hers, and the right hand her name. Sometimes the hands smack each other. Could this be something that is going on at school that she's having a hard time telling us? My daughter does talk, but she has a hard time expressing how she is feeling and gets frustrated when I ask.
Well, she may be just trying to act out with her hands.
Yeah.
You know, literally just using them as puppets. And I don't know how old this child is or what exactly the level of functioning is. But one of the things I've observed in autism is you can have, like in my own case, for example, my visual thinking works really well, but my algebra department is broken. There's a tendency to be uneven skills. And she may be, talking, maybe things aren't hooked up all that well, but she's just trying to act it out with her hands because that's how she's trying to communicate.
Absolutely. We had a lot of questions from parents whose children don't speak and wanting your help. One in particular, my son is 10 and is totally nonverbal but very bright. He's the only student in his class that sight reads and he spells quite well, no tantrums, very affectionate, great eye contact, and very gentle but totally nonverbal. His developmental neurologist says he has a great constitution and could start talking soon. Is there anything I can do to help him start speaking? He does flap his hands and lines up his toys, but otherwise seems to be really far ahead of his other classmates.
Well, what I'm wondering is maybe he needs to just start typing.
Yeah.
Like give him a laptop or even better yet, give him an iPad. And the reason why that works better is because when you type on the virtual keyboard, the print appears right next to the keyboard. Because some individuals that are nonverbal can't attention shift from print appearing on the top of the laptop screen and then have to look down at the keyboard. And that's why sometimes laptops don't work.
Okay.
iPads do. I would just introduce this kid to typing.
Okay.
Because I think he might become totally fluent typing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice.
I would definitely try that, and I would probably start with an iPad because that solves the attention shifting problem.
Love that. So many people wanted to know about telling their child that they have autism and when you knew that you were autistic, and if you have suggestions about how and when to tell someone that they're on the spectrum.
Well, if a kid can read, I mean, I have the book, Cy Montgomery book, Temple Grandin by Cy Montgomery, which is a really nice little book. Mm-hmm. And there's a number of children's books out. There's Little Rain Man by Karen Simmons. But the thing I'm seeing is I'm seeing too many kids on the high end of the spectrum getting hung up on their autism. Mm-hmm. All they want to talk about is their autism rather than about their science project, or they like, rocket ships, or they like dogs, or they like to do their math homework. I'd rather see them get hung up on something else.
Yeah.
Autism is an important part of who I am, but my other activities is my primary identity. And now for older individuals, when they're having dating problems and marital relations problems, this is where diagnosis is really helpful.
Yeah.
And I discussed this in my book, Different Not Less, where 14 people on the spectrum get diagnosed in the 50s and 60s, and that diagnosis really helped with their relationships.
Yeah.
And all the people in that book had jobs all their life. But I'm seeing too many smart kids getting so hung up on autism that they're not learning how to work. And I think this is a really serious problem.
Yeah.
And when I was 13 years old, I had a mother arranged a little job for me, sewing clothes for seamstress. When I was 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. When I was 16, I was doing carpentry work, shingling the barn roof. You know, painting signs for our school events. I had lots of work experience.
Absolutely. How old were you when you first knew the word autism?
Probably end of elementary school.
Okay. And was it your mom who talked to you about it?
Yes.
And how did she explain it to you, Temple?
Well, you see, this is the thing. You got to remember the era that I live in.
Yeah.
And there was no autism materials. There's no books or nothing that she could explain to me. Just explained that my brain was kind of different. And none of the materials that are available now were available. There were no support groups.
Yeah, but in a way, you know, I mean, we all look at you and you've done so well, and clearly she explained it to you so that it was something that was different. And of course, we know that it was important for your mom to know that you were different but equal, not less. Different but not less, as you've said.
The other thing that was done with me is things I was good at was encouraged, but I wasn't praised for every little tiny thing that I did. You know, when I was around 3rd or 4th grade, I made a beautiful clay horse, and that was praised.
Yeah.
And when I did a very nice watercolor of a beach, that was put in a professional frame and hung on the wall with the professional pictures. But every little piece of art I brought home, you know, crummy little thing I brought home from school, I can remember an ashtray I made in the 1st grade. It was, I know it's politically incorrect now to make ashtrays, but that was a 1st grade project.
Yes.
It's probably not worthy of praise. But when I did something really good, then she really praised it.
Okay. So you knew when you did something well because she saved the praise for that.
She saved the praise for the really good stuff.
Okay. You brought up the whole idea of romance and relationships, and we had a lot of people writing in for advice about that. One mom in particular who said, my son is 17 and I would like to know... Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's another one. How can I help my 20-year-old son with autism meet a girl or at least a companion? There is no hurry, of course, as he is anxious and afraid to deal with such an issue. He already works, drives, and manages his bank account, helps pay his bills, etc. There are times that he would like to have someone his own age to go to movies with and or travel with. And we had lots of people who wrote in, Temple, and said, how do we help our teenagers and our young adults to meet people with like interests for the potential for romance?
Well, I think we've got to get involved with the shared interests. I mean, you know, I know a lady named Jennifer Myers, and she's got a very nice book on learning life skills. And Jennifer met her husband at a science fiction convention. That's an example of shared interests.
Yeah.
They're both computer people. Or they met each other at a historical reenactment society. Get involved with events where you get these intense shared interests.
Yeah.
And that's where you can find a soulmate. You know, most of my friends are involved with autism, animal behavior, or, you know, scientific stuff.
And so you have your core group of friends shared interests.
That's right. So get your son involved with, you know, first thing I'd ask that mom is, what's your son interested in?
Yeah.
What's your son doing at work? Does he really like his work? You know, obviously if his work was janitor work, I don't think you want to have shared interest in that. But let's say he worked for a computer company, or he worked for, you know, something else, something a bit more interesting. There might be a shared interest there.
Okay.
But that's where things are going to be the best. It could be an art group. It could be a drama group. It could be a choir, a church choir. It could be all. So then maybe you do other singing things together.
Okay, great. And would you say that because we also had people with younger kids writing in saying, how do I work on friendships without the romance? So would the same thing apply to the younger kids as well? Okay.
Same thing. Shared interests. And the other thing we've got to work on is the turn taking.
Yeah.
And the kid not totally monopolizing the conversation. You know, like there's kind of a good rule of, you know, I got fixated on things like carnival rides. Well, okay, I only tell that story twice, you know, because I go on and on about that and just drive people completely crazy. It's the same thing, shared interests.
Okay, wonderful. Somebody wrote in, you were talking about algebra just a second ago. They were wanting to know, they had heard you talking and saying that there was one type of math that was particularly difficult, if not impossible, for people with autism. Other people wrote in and said that wasn't quite exactly right, that you mentioned that you're not good with algebra, but they want to know, would that be true of all people with autism? And it seems like a lot of our viewers were concerned about math problems that are considered word problems, that their children are having difficulty with
word
those.
Problems. I have a problem with word problems because you got to like sequence information, and I just don't get a lot of the word problems. And when it comes to things like algebra, it was horrible for me as a visual thinker. But there's other kids on the autism spectrum, they do algebra just fine.
Yeah.
So it's very variable.
Okay.
The pattern I tend to see, and I have a whole chapter on this in the Autistic Brain book, is I'm a photorealistic visual thinker. I can visualize things photorealistically in my head. I have trouble with algebra. Then you have another kind of kid. He's a math genius. He's good at everything in math, but may have trouble with reading. And then you got a kid that's a word kid, and he'll know everything about his favorite movies or about, cars or whatever his interest is. Math skills just average, not a visual thinker. And then you've got others that are an auditory learner, and they learn everything through their ears, and they are not a visual thinker, and so often they have visual processing problems.
So key is figuring out which one of those areas your child fits into, which will help you to know how to address issues.
Well, and the thing is, you can get mixtures of these things, too. But those are definitely, you can get mixtures.
Okay.
But it's very, very variable. But there is a tendency to be good at one thing and bad at something else. That seems to be kind of universal, the uneven skills when you get on the higher end of the spectrum.
Okay, awesome. We had a lot of questions about your mom, your awesome mom. Somebody in particular wanted to know, what do you think your mother would say is the single most important thing she focused on when raising you?
Well, she just focused on, she had a good sense of stretching me. She just knew how hard she could push. Push too hard to get a tantrum, but she was always stretching me just a little bit outside my comfort zone. I'm seeing too many kids that are kind of coddled too much, and they aren't learning how to shop and things like that. Now, obviously, no surprises. Surprises cause panic. You absolutely cannot have sudden surprises.
Okay.
But she kind of just knew just how to kind of stretch me and get me to develop.
Okay, awesome. What an awesome lady your mom is. Somebody else wants to know, do you have strategies that you have found successful in working through emotional highs and emotional lows?
Well, a lot of that's been controlled now with antidepressant medication. When I got to be a teenager, I had a horrible time with constant panic attacks and anxiety, and that is controlled with antidepressant medication.
Okay.
And, I have a lot of information on medication in the Way I See It book and Thinking in Pictures. Oh, there's way too many medications given out to little kids like candy. But for me, a low dose of an antidepressant stopped the anxiety.
Okay.
And you've got to use very, very low doses, because if you use too high a dose, you're going to get agitation and insomnia. I've had probably 100 parents say to me, oh, he did just wonderful on a low dose of Prozac, and we doubled it, and it was just horrible.
Okay.
He should have stayed on the low dose.
And we had a lot of questions that came in about medication, those sorts, and people were wanting to know, how do you feel about prescription medications versus homeopathic medications for anxiety, if you have any preference?
Well, I think we need to get rid of all this fighting between the alternative and regular medication. In very young children, I definitely want to avoid heavy-duty drugs with bad side effects, like the antipsychotics, like Risperdal or Abilify. I want to try to avoid those in young kids. Let's do some of the diets first.
Yeah.
Those help a subset of kids. Dairy-free, wheat-free, maybe try some B vitamins and some magnesium. Fish oil supplements have a good effect on the brain. Not eating a ton of sugar, getting plenty of exercise.
Yeah.
Let's do some of those things first. But there are some older kids and adults that are going to need some careful, conservative use of medication. And I recommend that you read Thinking in Pictures and my second edition of my Way I See It book. I also have some information on templegrandin.com.
Okay, awesome. I love this question. We had a lot of questions about educating other people about how how the autistic brain works, and I'm loving that you've got a whole book about this coming out. The question is how you learn to express the manner of your thought process so that others might understand how you think and thereby help you to understand how neurotypical people think. My child struggles daily with making themselves understood in a neurotypical world, and you seem to have gained an understanding, if not an actual knack for it. And I do think, Temple, I have to say that I think there are so many things about you that are wonderful, but one of the greatest gifts I feel as a parent that you do give us that insight, and you've shown us actually visually how your brain works, and it's so eye-opening. How can we help our other kids to be able to show us how their brain works?
Well, first of all, when I was very young, I didn't know that other people didn't think in pictures.
Right.
And one of the mistakes I made when I wrote Thinking in Pictures was just thinking everybody on the autism spectrum thinks in pictures, which is not true. And then I started, reading more and more stuff and learning more and more things and questioning people about how they think. I realized how my thinking was different. And there's going to be a whole chapter in the new book just on this whole, different ways people think. I find this to be a very fascinating subject.
Yeah.
And I've read other self-reports. I have found that, some of the brain research and some of the self-reports were some of the best things that I read. Now, how can you tell if your little kid what kind of mind he has? It usually doesn't show up until 3rd or 4th grade, 8 or 9 years old.
Okay.
That is when I did my really good artwork, and my visual thinking showed up as artwork. Things like making a very nice clay horse, for example, and drawing. And you want to encourage the kid to draw lots of other things. If the kid's good at math, that's going to show up, in 3rd or 4th grade. Kid's good at reading, that's going to show up. First of all, what subject is a kid good at? Does a kid like to build with Legos? That's going to be both the visual thinkers and the mathematical thinkers. And then the word kids don't usually care about Legos.
Interesting, very interesting, because I hear my kid in there. That's a wonderful thing. Okay, we have a question about dealing with when a child is perseverating on something, because, and of course I've lost it on the list here, but a parent who wrote in said when their child perseverates on something that it raises their anxiety. And what advice would you give to the parent about dealing with the child's perseveration? Do they stop it or let it be? And then if they're going to let the child continue to perseverate on something, how do they deal with their own anxiety having to do with it?
Well, what was done with my perseveration was allowed to have an hour after lunch where I could spin things. And other times it was not allowed.
Yeah.
Dinner table, not allowed. So I think it's okay to give a child some times in the day where he can do some of this perseveration stuff. And then you have other times in the day where it's not allowed, like church and school and classroom. I think it's just fine when the kid gets home from school. He could have an hour to decompress and calm down and perseverate, maybe even play a video game for an hour. But then after an hour, then I want to stop it.
And then for the parent who's feeling the anxiety when their child is perseverating, any advice on that, Temple?
Well, I would just tell them that if you limit it, not to worry about it.
Okay.
They do these things to calm down. And I think it's best to allow some scheduled time where some of this stuff is allowed, and then other times we don't do it, like at the table, for example.
Right. I love this question. I can't wait to hear your answer. Somebody wrote in, with your ability to see details, do you have any ideas or solutions for how Colorado can conserve or channel our water to be of better use for our crops?
Oh boy, I'd have to do a lot of studying on that. I don't have the knowledge to answer that one. Now, pictures started to come into my head. I started seeing satellite photographs. I started seeing, when I lived in Arizona, the Salt River dams and things. But there's a lot of stuff I don't know enough about that to say anything. Okay, but I love getting an insight into how you begin to problem solve. Very fascinating. Well, the first pictures that came into my head were satellite photos that show rivers. Fascinating. Fascinating. A lot of people interested in your schooling. One person in particular who wrote it and said that they also attended the Hampshire Country School in New Hampshire from 78 to 81. That was the same private school that you attended. They want to know what you would have been gone by that point. And they want to know, did you know Miss Adelaide Patey, the director of the school? Oh, absolutely, I did. Adelaide was there, and then Henry Patey was there. Oh, yes, I knew Adelaide Patey really, really well.
Wonderful. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to hear that. Lots of questions about finding jobs for kids that are on the spectrum and making sure that it's something that keeps their interest, and in particular about what to do earlier to get a child ready with job skills before they reach the age of 20.
I think we need to start with 13-year-olds. This is the age where kids used to get paper routes, and I know the paper routes are gone now. And if you do have a paper route available, if it's a high-functioning kid, give them a paper route. So let's do other activities outside the home. How about walking dogs? And the thing I like about that is you have to do it every single day, rain or shine. Let's figure out jobs in the neighborhood. How about a tour guide at a little local museum? Some museums will take them at age 12. When they're 16, they can volunteer at an animal shelter. They could work at a farmer's market. They could make PowerPoints for business people. They could fix computers for local businesses. These are things that parents need to just set up in the community with little local businesses to get kids doing things. They've got to learn the discipline of work, and I think it needs to start at 13.
Wow.
But I also think it's never too late to start. I mean, you might have a 22-year-old that's been sitting around. We've got to get him out of the house, and he's got to start doing things.
Okay.
I talked to some parents the other day. Dad owned a store, and their son had problems with the cash register, an very old-fashioned cash register. I said, Dad, why don't you buy a scanner? Because there's problems there with multitasking. Let's just buy a scanner.
Yeah.
They're not that expensive now. And then the 22-year-old's going to get his butt out of the house, and he's going to learn how to use the scanner, and that's not going to tax multitasking. Because the problem that you have is long strings of verbal information are not remembered, and multitasking can be a real problem.
Absolutely. Got a question from a friend. She says, I have an autistic friend. He's pretty social, but he can't read and doesn't have a job. His parents have a lot of money, and he doesn't need to worry about working. He has certain obsessions like Bigfoot and movie action figures. For the most part, his obsessions are fully supported. He's been on Bigfoot hunts and spends thousands of dollars on action figures every year. I'm just wondering if you feel that it's okay to be following the same interests he's had as a kid, or do you think he should be guided to try to learn and read into more adult areas of his life and pushed to do more things? He's never been...
I think we have to do
ahead.
With fixations is we need to broaden them out. When I was very young, I drew constant horse heads all the time. Mm-hmm. Well, you've got to broaden that out. Okay, let's do the horse's stable. Let's draw a picture of a place where a horse might go. In other words, broaden it out. Okay, Bigfoot hunts. Well, let's learn about some of the woods and the habitat where Bigfoot lives. Start an interest in botany, maybe. You see how I'm making an associative link. Also, this kid should have been, learning some work skills.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know exactly what his level of functioning is. That's something where I'd have to ask those parents some more questions.
Right.
So I could think of a job that would be appropriate for his level of functioning. But I would definitely try to channel this into something else. And, okay, we can go on a Bigfoot expedition, but then let's learn about some of the plants that are in that forest where you went on an expedition.
Okay, so broaden it out. A lot of questions about schooling and recommendations for schooling. Some about, one in particular, my son has Asperger's and he's continually bored in school. Do you recommend homeschooling?
I don't even know how old this child is.
No, I know, and I don't either.
I don't know anything about it. I would have to ask more questions. I was one of the teenagers that had to be taken out of a regular school. Mm-hmm. But if you homeschool a kid, you can't just let them become a recluse in the house.
Right.
They've got to be out. You've got to get lots of activities planned where they're out doing things. And if you're homeschooling high-functioning teenager, I think we need to get him a job outside the home.
Okay, great. I love this one. Any advice you can give someone teaching an autistic child how to ride a horse?
Oh, some kids do just great on a horse, and they oftentimes are a little bit afraid when they get on, but there's some nonverbal kids that said their first words on a horse because there's something good about the rhythm and balancing. Now, I want to emphasize it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Therapeutic riding is really wonderful for some kids and not appropriate for others. Same thing with service dogs. For some kids, it's absolutely the best thing. But there's other kids that are terrified of dogs because they never know when it's going to bark and hurt their ears.
Right.
So for one child, it's appropriate. For another child, it's not.
Okay. Talking about math, and we talked about algebra a little bit, somebody wrote in and said, my 18-year-old son struggles with algebra too because he can no longer do the math in his head and hates calculators, working on them, but is excellent in chemistry, biology, principles of architecture, and construction. He wants to be a civil engineer. However, I don't know if the math is going to be a struggle and hold him back. Do you have any advice?
Well, I couldn't do algebra, so I basically had to go into the field of industrial design.
Okay.
You know, when you build projects, you have both the industrial design part, the art part, the architecture part, and unfortunately, a lot of universities require algebra. And the only way I got through college was back in '66. The required math class was finite math, which is matrices, probability, and statistics. And I get worried that this algebra requirement is going to block a lot of people. Now, if the problem is doesn't want to use calculators, I'd like to try to figure out some way to get around that. I also find kids that cannot do algebra go to geometry and calculus just fine. You know, there seem to be spotty skills. I've seen situations where the child was passing high-level physics and couldn't graduate from high school. I think one of the ways to get around this is to sign up for a few classes in the college in things you're good at and do so good that you get a professor interested in you, and there can be ways to get around some of these requirements. You know, but he's going to need to go in there and do gorgeous architecture projects or something like that. And then sometimes you can get in the back door. And then I'd want to ask more questions about why the calculus is such a problem. Maybe we get a different kind of calculator.
Okay, interesting. Lots of questions about music. Do you like music? Is music a comfort to you? And do you think music is a beneficial thing to teach individuals on the autism spectrum?
Absolutely, yes. There are some kids that can learn to sing their words before they learn to speak them, because singing is on different circuits. So, yes, I think music definitely should be introduced to kids. There's some kids where high-pitched sounds are going to hurt the ears, so maybe flute might be a bad idea.
Okay.
There's others that don't like drums. Yes, I definitely, if they really like music, then go with it.
Okay, and do you like music? Do you personally find it relaxing? Do you listen to music?
Yes, I like to listen to some classical. I like Johnny Cash country, and there's certain kinds of pounding rock that I just hate.
Okay.
It's sort of like a jackhammer on my head, but a lot of music I like.
Do you listen to music in the car when you're driving?
Yes, I do.
And Johnny Cash is your favorite?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite CDs. I also really like Beatles.
Oh, cool. Very, very cool. Another person who writes, I read where you said that before you became verbal, you would get so frustrated you would scream. I have a 7-year-old grandson who is high functioning on the spectrum. He has a speech delay, but is now fully verbal, and in a regular first grade class. His 2.5-year-old brother chatters a lot but says very few real words. However, he does a lot of screaming and grunting. I can tell it is out of frustration. Do you remember what happened when you finally began to speak? Was it the result of speech therapy, or did you just wake up one morning and start talking?
No, I had problems with expressive language, and I had a hard time getting my words out. And you'll see brain scans in the Autistic Brain book that show how I had difficulty getting my words out because the circuits were smaller than normal. And speech problems can be variable. You can have problems with expressive language, problems with hearing, where the hard consonant sound's not heard, or the kid might be echolalic, but he doesn't know what it means. My speech came in slowly, a few stressed words at a time. But I want to emphasize, these things are very variable.
Okay, but I listen to you now, Temple, and you are so expressive, and you are such a brilliant speaker. Is it just that you continued to work, and that the people around you just didn't let up and kept working on those skills with you? What do you attribute your success to in the area of in this area of verbal communication?
Lots of hard work. You've got to keep learning. When I gave my first talk in graduate school, I panicked and I walked out. And you just get better the more you do it. You just keep learning. It's gradual. There's no single turning point, no single breakthrough.
Okay, absolutely. And I know we have to let you go in a minute. Have we got you for just like 2 more minutes?
Okay.
Okay. I want to know, you talked a little bit about art, and we had many questions, people writing about art, and for kids who already seem to have an ability with art, how much do we want to encourage that with autism? And for children who get frustrated doing art, is it something that we want to keep massaging and have them continue, don't give up on art, have it be a part of their curriculum?
Well, if the child's good at art, I want to develop it, because
Okay.
art's the basics of my design career. Child's good at art, develop it. I wasn't allowed to just do constant horse heads. You know, we're going to have to learn how to draw other things. And if you have a child that absolutely hates art, well, there's a point where I'm going to back off.
Okay.
You know, don't pound on the thing that they have difficulty with. Build on the area of strength. Build on the thing the child's good at, with the goal of turning it into a career.
Okay. A question about learning other languages. People wanted to know if you think that's
terrible.
They want to know if you studied Latin.
I never studied Latin, but I got a D in French.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, you've got autistic kids that absolutely excel in language.
Okay.
This is where you get back to the uneven skills.
Right.
Some are going to be super good at this, and others are going to be super bad like me.
Okay, we are out of time, but we appreciate you so much, Temple. You are an inspiration to all of us, and I hope that, I know you got a lot of things to do to promote your book. Again, it's called The Autistic Brain, and it comes out on the 30th of April. And
yes, and you can pre-order on Amazon now.
okay, great. So we want everybody to do that. We just absolutely adore you. We hope that once you're done promoting the book that we can have, because I have pages more of questions and pages more of praise that we might have to email to you, because so many people wanted to tell you how much they adore you, how much you've helped them with their children, and individuals who are on the spectrum, how much you've inspired them. So we thank you so much, Temple.
Well, thank you, and I hope I've given some parents and teachers some insight today.
You absolutely have.
I can't emphasize enough the importance of good teachers and people that just work with me.
Well, we appreciate that, and I think you've given great advice for all of them. And I hope you can dig out from the snow.
Okay, thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay. Yeah, bye.